and then Alan Bennett fainted, and that's when the tiger escaped. So what can you do? Anyway, good evening, everybody. Welcome to slightly late tonight because we had the old technical gremlins. Sorry, him there, technical gremlins. For some reason, Drew's state-of-the-art, beautiful little microphone won't talk to his computer, so I'm afraid he's still broadcasting from inside the fishbowl.
Hang on, you just told me it sounded all right.
Sounds okay.
Yeah, it sounds fine. It sounds fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Given that you're in the hangar bay for the TIE fighters, I'm surprised we could get any audio at all, given how far away you are.
Hush up and move on.
We just carry on.
Yeah, if everybody can also give us a heads up tonight on how the audio sounds, then that would be splendid, because we are trying a few new things here. So anyway, delighted to say we have, the boys are back in town. So we have the full trio tonight, and we have two weighty, meaty subjects to get our teeth into without lapsing into...
Two weighty, meaty subjects with which to offend everybody.
Am I being brought in on what these subjects are, or am I just going to?
Yeah, the ones they are.
Well, you started it.
Oh God! Oh, the ones I wrote about. Oh, okay. Fair enough.
the ones I've written about as well, because it seems.
What did you think you were here
I had literally no idea. I just thought that you just fancied having me on to abuse me and talk to me over biscuits.
I mean, that will be undoubtedly part of the evening.
Well, yes, of course. I wouldn't expect anything else. Yeah. So, yes, we're going to talk about those.
Right. We are. We are going to talk about tonight two things. Is the hobby becoming unaffordable? That's number one.
No.
So, I think it needs a bell for that one. And then the other one we will be talking about is the hobby dying?
No. Anyway, now we've cleared those two up.
Okay. Well, let's. They both they're both on the they're both on the same Venn diagram. It's always be a circle. So the hobby is unaffordable. Where do we start with that one, gentlemen?
Well, we start with our fixed opinions, and all three of us are of the same opinion that no, it's not, don't we? But then we have to flesh that out a little bit with what we mean by no, it's not. And this hobby is and always has been precisely as expensive as you want to make it.
Well, yes. I mean, fundamentally, that's the answer, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Fundamentally, the answer to the question, is this hobby too expensive, is no. And there's a full stop at the end of that. This came up during a discussion that I think all of us saw online. And it was something along the lines of, it's far too expensive because X kit is now £20, and that's outside pocket money. But then when you factor in paints, glues, tools, all of the other ancillaries that go with it, if you're starting out, then it becomes very expensive. Yeah, well, isn't that the same for every single hobby that you'll ever pursue?
Yes.
Because at some point you're going to have to think to yourself, well, I quite fancy having a go at playing drums, so presumably I've got to buy a drum kit, or I'd like to take up riding a motorcycle. Now, presumably that involves buying a motorcycle and taking lessons, or I'd like to learn to drive a car, which involves buying a car and having lessons. You can't suddenly take something up and expect that you don't have to outlay some kind of money into it before you begin. And I thought it was such a preposterous notion that I kind of was left scratching my head thinking, what do you want? Do you want to be able to, stock up your workbench and buy a kit and all the paints and all the glues and all the tools and all of that sort of stuff for £10? Because if that's the case, you're going to be very disappointed very quickly. But it was one of those where you only really have to, if you want to take up building models, You can go out and buy a £5 plastic model kit. You can then, or you could buy a model kit that's got paints and glues in with it if you want to just have a go at sticking something together and painting the results. But things develop slowly, don't they, in any hobby? Take the drumming analogy to begin with. You don't suddenly start, playing drums and go out and buy Neil Peart's drum workshop kit for £25,000. You start off at the bottom and you buy a beginner's kit with beginner's cymbals and beginner's pedals, and you learn how to play that. And then you might replace the drum heads to better ones to make it sound better. Then you might replace the cymbals to make those sound better, replace the stands, make those more heavyweight. Each of those is an incremental change. You don't suddenly go out and splurge all this money on the best gear before you even understand the fundamentals and the basics of it, or whether or not you've discovered if that hobby is for you at all. Because sometimes you'll take up something, won't you? You could take up, I don't know, anything, and spend some time and think, actually, it's not really for me.
Like you could take up modelling and build 3 or 4 models and decide it really isn't as engaging as you wanted it to be.
Exactly. It's exactly that kind of thing.
It's a perfectly legitimate discovery to make, isn't it? But I think for me, people are saying, I just saw a comment back up a little bit, and I can't remember who it was, about, John Patrick Houston. There, John.
Yeah, I'm looking.
In fairness, most of us have spent. Have you got that one?
No, there we go. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fairness, most of us spent decades accumulating our stash tool supply. Just coming into the hobby, it would be crazy expensive to catch up. No, because you don't need to catch up. Who are you trying to catch up with? John has shown, and I've seen it done many times, and John's done it a couple of times, how cheap it can be to get into this hobby with a few really basic tools.
Yeah.
It doesn't at all have to be crazy expensive. If you want to match the kind of stashes and the kind of equipment that like Spencer has, John has, I have, that's going to be crazy expensive. But but without wanting to insult anybody, you're probably not going to get the best from them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So spending that sum of money on something is something you're not going to get the best out of for years.
I mean, I don't. We're all very much from the same background, aren't we? The three of us. We're almost the same age. We came into the hobby pretty much at the same time, and we build essentially the same things. So we're a sort of a cluster of model makers who have the same kind of background, if not entirely similar. And I'm assuming that you guys started off as I did. I started off building models like on a small little table in my bedroom that had probably had a cardboard box from a kit that had half a dozen paints in it. There was a bottle of thinners that were probably on the table that my brushes were resting in until everything kind of curled up. All of those kind of things. I think I used a Stanley knife to begin with, or something like that. Or one of those. You remember the orange craft knives you used to be able to get, the disposable ones, which I used for years. In fact, long before I got scalpels or anything.
I first started modelling at 7 years old, and it was 9 years old before I wasn't snapping parts off the screw with my hand.
I still find something extraordinarily cathartic about snapping parts away from screws.
It was like I literally sat on my bed.
Just broke them off, and then trimmed off the burrs with your teeth and that kind of, all of those sort of things. But I mean, yes, you're absolutely right, Drew. If we, if any of the three of us, or anybody probably watching this, went out and priced up what was in their workroom and went to buy it in one block, I mean, mine would be running to tens of thousands of pounds. Just what's in my. If you look at the paint stock that's out there at £2.50 a bottle, you'd be looking at thousands of pounds just in paint. Before you look at the kits and the tools and airbrushes, between us, you're looking at.
I've got 700.
hundreds of pounds, but it doesn't need to be like that. And one of the things that we've tried to sort of talk about over the last 18 months is this kind of low pricing that we've done. I mean, we ran an entire series of builds on kits that were less than £20 to begin with, and we bought toolkits that were £10 that you could go out and buy. We ran airbrushes that were 30 quid. You know, it was all of those kind of things. And I think when people are saying the hobby is too expensive, what they mean by that is, in the main, and forgive me if I'm generalizing beyond what I should, but in the main, what they mean is, I want to be able to buy these things, but I can't afford them. I want to be able to buy what I see online, but I can't afford those things. It's not that it's too expensive. It's just that what they want is out of their price bracket. And those two arguments are entirely different. They're one thing is not the same as another. And I understand fundamentally, deep-seated understanding of people that can't afford things. So I'm not denigrating that in any way. But I think the two things are different. I've seen this Tamiya F14. I would love to buy that, but I can't afford to buy that because I've got to feed my family. That's a
perfectly legitimate, you know,
yeah,
that is absolutely, and not only is that legitimate, that is a perfectly wise.
Yes,
to make
absolutely.
that kind of value decision, that, you know, putting your family before a Tamiya Tomcat it is only right and proper.
All right, we've got a comment here from Juan Francisco Molinido. He says, in the 90s, it was a cheaper hobby, but it was also not that sophisticated as it is now. So many new brands, tools, paints, glues, etc. What you do to keep the pace? I will slightly disagree a little bit there, because I can remember in the 90s, I certainly, coming just fresh out of art college and kind of like forever bouncing from one job I didn't like to another. Oh, we've upset him. He's gone. He's
had enough.
He's had enough. There we go. No, but the thing was, it was, I can remember seeing, that was when Dragon were coming onto the scene, and seeing the Dragon kits coming back, and some of the new Tamiya stuff, and we had, you know, other kit companies out there, and I was still limited by budget. Essentially, that's why I got into the writing game, because you know, suddenly you got kit sent to you, which is, but yeah, it was. I think the problem we have is that you've got a twofold thing here. Is you've got people who perhaps have come back to the hobby after a long absence. This hobby changes, you know, year by year. You can, you know, I go and make a cup of tea, come back, and there's a brand new kit company, a new kit line's been announced. It can be overwhelming to, you know, to come back into this hobby and see, you know, it's still the same hobby, but the landscape has changed considerably from decades ago, and the, you know, the pace of kit releases is unrelenting. But what you've got there is, if you've come in from years ago when prices were, you know, that particular price, and you come in now and you're seeing kits that are tens of pounds, if not now we're sneaking up into, you know, hundreds of pounds. But there is a reason why they're hundreds of pounds, because they are not the standard of kits that you were buying decades ago. You see, and the irony is, you've got the, you know, in many respects, you've got the enthusiast end, which has always been saying, "Oh, more detail, we want more accuracy, more detail." They're getting it now, but you don't get that for cheaps.
No,
that costs in terms of the research and development. It costs in terms of the design, certainly in terms of the tooling. More so if you're suddenly doing a lot of slide molding, because that, your tooling costs are going to go through the roof. You know, and to capture shapes and do all that. So you're not going to have state-of-the-art kits these days for I'm not even going to say pocket money prices. You're not going to have state-of-the-art kits these days for the equivalent price of what they would have been 30, 40 years ago. Let's take a broad example. Let's say Tamiya's, we'll single it out, but it's one that people comment on. Tamiya's new 48 scale Phantom. That is not going to cost, inflation adjusted, it's not going to cost the same as, say, a 48 scale Eschi kit from 1979, or the early 1980s. It's not going to cost the same as the Eschi kit from the 1980s, because you only have to look at the difference in the tooling. They are universes apart in terms of detail and accuracy.
Different world, isn't it?
Yeah. If you want to have that, if you want to have that Tamiya 48 scale Phantom at, let's just say, £29.99, fine, but it's going to have probably 1/10 the amount of parts. It's going to have, shall we say, it's going to have far less detail. It's going to be, it will be compromised to hit that price point.
Also, my friend, sorry to cut across you, Drew. My Harris Alley, fantastic model maker, as I'm sure you're all well aware, popped round yesterday to have a bit of a chat, and he dropped a load of magazines off, including a huge pile of very early 70s Airfix magazines and some Model World magazines, which I've never seen from the early 70s as well, which are very good, I have to say. Chris Ellis's magazine from that period,
yeah,
a whole bunch of them. Anyway, one of amongst the magazines that were dropped off was this.
Yeah, got that one.
Okay, so September 1979. Okay, now then, this great magazine. As you
is that the one? Is that the one where he scratch builds a Bristol Scout?
I'm not sure. Can't remember. Not sure. It's the one that's got Chris Ellis's conversion of the Matchbox Harrier into a Sea Harrier.
Into a Sea Harrier, yeah.
Yes. Very, very poorly, I have to say. Anyhow, that aside. So this magazine back in 1979 was 45 pence. Okay. So now the Airfix magazine is £5. Okay. Just over 10 times more in 2021 as it was in 1979. Okay. Now, there's always this sort of idea that model kits today are more expensive than they were back then. Okay. However, that doesn't always bear any kind of scrutiny, really, if you start looking at things. In here, there is this classic advert for BMW models. We've all seen these adverts. They're famous. Anyway, but they serve as a time capsule for research into this subject, if you really want to go down that route. And we're talking about sort of expense and that kind of thing. Back then, the Eschi 48 scale Skyhawk, which is still available under the Italeri banner, was available for £2.64 back then in 1979. Today, it's about £25. Kit.
That's about 10 times.
10 times more.
That's about the same price increase as the magazine.
Yes, indeed. Okay, if we look at some of the other kits that were kind of available back then, there's some Hella kits in here as well. Hella kits back then, the Mirage F1 and that sort of cluster of kits, Mirage F1, Starfighter, Jaguar, Mirage 3, Saab Viggen, all of which are kind of currently knocking around in various guises. They were £2.48. Well, they're around about that price now. They're around about £25, that cluster of kits. Similarly, you can look at the prices for some of the Hasegawa kits that are in here. There was some prices in here. 72nd scale Hasegawa kits, F104 Starfighter, Freedom Fighter, A7 Corsair, that kind of thing. They were £1.16 back then. Now I know they've re-released some of them, and they're about a tenner now. So actually, the cost of these kits has
Pro
kind
rata,
of remained
it's
stable. Yeah. The kind of the idea that back then somehow they were a lot cheaper. I could never have afforded to spend £2.48 on a 72nd scale Mirage F1 kit from Hella.
It was a birthday treat for me.
Absolutely. But I could go out and buy, a Novo Vampire for 39p, which was about the price of this, which would be today about a £5.
Yeah.
So I think it's sometimes worth kind of having a look out there in terms of bedrock products. That the prices are very similar now. If you look at how much the new Mosquito is, FX Mosquito is 20 quid now, and a magazine is a £5. So back then in 1979, that Mosquito would have been about I'm trying to think. My rudimentary maths. About 2 quid?
No, right? It would have been
10 times less. 20 quid, 2 quid. That's right, isn't it?
No, it would have been about.
Your working out is right, but I think the Mosquito is a higher range than the original Mosquito, isn't it? As well.
Yeah. Series 2, Series 2, and Series 3 around about 1979. I got them actually scribbled in a catalogue somewhere, but they would have been around the kind of hovering around like the £1 mark-ish.
So that's
if that.
So what would what series is that kit now? Is it Series 4 kit? Is it
something like that? I can specifically remember in my local shop in my town in 1978, the plastic package, the clear plastic packaged Airfix Series 1 were 45 pence.
Mm-hmm.
The Series 2 were 55 pence.
Mm-hmm.
The Series 3 were 75 pence. The Series 4 were £1.15.
That's it.
That's an astonishing recall. That's brilliant.
Because I can remember, and it was like Matchbox 2 colour kits were 45 pence in my local my local newsagents, and the 3 colour kits were 75 pence. And I can remember being blown away when my local Tesco's opened, and they were selling the 2 colour kits for 39 pence and the 3 colour kits for 45 pence.
Well, here you go. This is a sort of a good comparator to that as well. H.J. Walker of Hackney Limited.
H.J. Walker Hackney,
which was a shop that another one of those mythical shops that we would have all liked to have
I never ordered anything from, and
from H.J. Walker.
With a postal order.
In here, there are some prices for Tamiya 48 scale kits. Hawker Siddeley Harrier back then was £3.50 in 1979, and the brand new, I would imagine, or almost brand new at that point, F15 Eagle 48 scale one, which is the one that's currently in the range, that was £7.99. Well, 10 times £7.99 would make that kit £79 today, and it's about £22 today to buy that 48 scale F15. That Harrier, the C Harrier that's based on that Harrier GR1 mold, is somewhere around about 15 quid. Am I right in thinking?
What kit are we talking about again? I'm
the
just
48 scale C Harrier, the Tamiya one.
Right. Okay.
I think that's around about that sort of that kind of price. But it does.
How much did you say it was again?
Back then, it was £3.50.
Okay, well, it only does £3. Yeah, 1979.
Yeah, so it's £3.50 in 1979. Today, how much is the Sea Harrier that's based on that kit?
The Sea Harrier is based on it's about 26 quid.
Just over 20 quid, is it? Something like that.
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
Expensive, is it? So the Tamiya prices have not kept in terms of those products from back then are actually much cheaper today than they were in 1979, comparatively speaking. So that's an interesting kind of thing. They haven't gone up following that. So sometimes there's a counter argument, isn't there, that these tools have been paid for, why are they still charging premium prices for these kits? The answer to that is they're not anymore.
Yeah, just to give you a quick. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not looking at the football scores. I'm actually looking at the. I'm actually doing the Bank of England inflation adjuster here, and it won't let me do. It won't let me do percentages, but it does let me do overall figures. So let's say £3 in 1979, and it's showing amount. So £3 in 1979 these days would be the equivalent of £15.52. So if we add another 50p on top of that,
has just said there that the Sea Harrier is 15 quid in Hobbycraft.
Well, there you go. It's kind of only gone up.
Yeah.
Following
just the first one that I did when I did a Google search of Tamiya Sea Harrier, and one of the first things that came up, and they're watching tonight. Hello, everybody at Jadlam. Actually came up as Jadlam, £12.95.
There we go.
So I think we can say that if you adjust it for inflation, that Sea Harrier today would be around the £17-18 mark. It's not. It's at least if you shop around, you can get it for £4 or £5 cheaper than that.
Yeah.
And the other argument we have to make is that is for kits that are in some cases 35, 40 years old. A kit tool today is an order of magnitude more involved, more complicated, higher technologies, better decals, better. The whole package is orders of magnitude better.
Yes.
Than you would get back then.
And I will also add this, because this feeds into the op-ed that I did for Model Airplane International this month, which was titled "The Price Is Wrong," which talks all about this. And one of the points that I make is that when people say, "Oh, that kit was made years ago, Pete," they shouldn't be charging that much for it now. It must have paid its costs off. Probably did, but the problem you got is it's being brought back into the market in 2021, not being brought back into the market in 1970. So all your raw material costs are 2021 prices. All your labor costs are 2021. All your energy, your transport, the price of oil, the price of paper, the price of ink, everything.
I think it would be interesting. We can't discuss it on here. For obvious reasons, but I think it would be really interesting for modelers to have an insight into how much an ISO container coming across from Japan empty costs today compared to how much it cost this time last year, beginning of last year, 5 years ago. The cost of simply shipping product across the globe now is eye-wateringly different compared to what it was as well. It's just astonishing. I mean, all of us have probably had a similar conversation, but I had a conversation with a hobby company about it. It's extraordinary how much that cost has gone up.
And it's not a percentage, it's multiples more expensive.
Yes,
it's not like they're not saying that the cost of shipping stuff from Japan has gone up 25%. No, it's gone up hundreds of percent.
Literally hundreds of percent. Yeah, just for the container, not for the kit. Just the container that they go in.
A pandemic and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
Absolutely. There was an interesting point that was made earlier on that I think bears discussion as well, and that's the idea, the comparable between this hobby and other hobbies, and how much things cost. Somebody, one of the viewers brought up if you compare it to gig tickets, or which Drew knows an awful lot about, if you compare it to going to the cinema or sport or whatever, to give you an idea of how much some hobbies can cost. I'm going to watch Coventry City on Saturday play QPR in London, and that's not a hobby, that's a penance. And to begin with, I paid £35 for my ticket to get into the game, and I've paid £42 for the train to get me into London before I even begin my day. That's the thick end of £100 just to get me to the ground. That doesn't include taxis or the tube or food or having a beer while I'm there or any of those things. That's just that base level. So even if the ground was next door to me and I wanted to go and see the game, that would be £35 for 90 minutes of football. So when you compare it like that, and you look at buying a kit for £35, and then having the entertainment of putting it together and painting it and all of that kind of stuff, and then sticking it in your display case, I think suddenly things start to sort of make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I have
because
spent, in the last week, since a week Monday, I have spent on myself about £550 on gig tickets.
I was just going to say, compared to a very long time ago when I sent off a postal order to the Gloucester Leisure Centre to go and see Marillion plus support in 1984, and I think it was something like about £1.50. Yeah, you try going to see a band these days. You know, let's just imagine Genesis announced they were doing a tour.
Which they have.
That's £100 ticket. That's a £100 ticket to see them.
And that's the base level ticket.
Yeah, you know, that's a £100 ticket. You know, I've bought tickets to see Devin Townsend next April. One of them's in the Royal Albert Hall. That's a £60 ticket. That's a £60 ticket for 2.5, 3 hours of entertainment.
Yeah.
Now, do I think I'm going to get my money's worth? Yes, it's Devin Townsend.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away from the fact that I've just spent £60 for 2 hours or 3 hours of entertainment.
But these things.
Just going to say, we've actually got. Here we go. This is the guys from Jadlam have said the cost has increased by 500 to 700.
Yeah, I'd heard 700% was one of the figures that I had quoted to me. As the increase,
and that cost has to be levied somewhere. So, but they're talking about, in my case, football, because I watch a lot of football, and your case, music, because you watch a lot of music. Those two things are in essence very similar to the conversation that we're having in what you choose to watch. Drew, you could go to a local pub in your town and go and watch live music, presumably. Let's stretch the argument slightly, but you could go on a Saturday night and go and watch a band play in a local pub, and presumably have a nice evening watching a bit of music, having a few beers, and that's live music in its base form. I could go to watch Telford United, who are my local club, who I also follow. I could go and watch Telford play, and that would cost me £15 to go there, including the parking and everything, and I get to watch a game of football. So if these things were out of my budget, and I only do a limited number of away games for obvious reasons, because of the cost, but if those things were out of my budget, I could still go and watch football. If watching Devin Townsend in the Royal Albert Hall was out of your budget, you could still go and watch music in your local pub. So it's a similar kind of argument, isn't it? You set your budget to the level that you can afford.
You cut your cloth, don't you? You cut your cloth.
Yes, it's a kind of similar. It's exactly the same.
I think one of the things I've been thinking and trying to articulate is that one of the biggest things, one of the biggest factors in all this is the medium that we're all communicating on and broadcasting to people on social media.
Yeah,
it's made people. It's opened this hobby up massively to where people used to have a magazine a month to get all their news from. Now they're literally being bombarded at all times on all of these Facebook pages and stuff with new kits, new manufacturers, new tools. And there's kind of like this panic. I need to keep up.
There is a peer pressure.
Yeah, you don't need to keep up. You need to satisfy your urge to build models.
Yeah,
and if you're purely about trying to keep up with the whoever's, you are missing the point.
And I think that is something that you certainly see borne out. And we're going off slightly on a tangent here. Who us? When you see people saying, I bought this. How do you use it? Because they've seen other people using a product, and I've got to be in on this. I've got it right. Well done. I've gone out and bought my Brian Ray replica guitar. Brilliant. Yeah. How do you play a G chord? And it's like,
I feel
it's the peer pressure.
And I know all of us sort of, to a degree, have sort of discussed this in the past, and you and I, John, have spent a great deal of time and energy on this over the last 12 months, actually to the point where we just wore ourselves into the ground. And that, because I really do feel strongly that this hobby should be enjoyed by the widest group of people possible. And the reason for that is, without sort of going into too much detail, I came from a very poor background. Over the, when we were growing up, we didn't have anything at all. And, and I was very aware pre all of this, that there were people that I knew, people in the village I lived in, who had a great deal more than I did. So I kind of had to deal with what we could afford. And I've always been cognizant of that fact, growing up. And I've been very cognizant of that fact as I've become an adult and I've been in the industry, because I'm very fortunate. I get given a lot of things, and I build a lot for magazines and all of that. And a lot of the time, what I do is supported by others. And I'm very grateful for the position I find myself in. And I never lose sight of that. But as a result of that rarefied atmosphere that I live in, I feel that I need to give back to those who are in a less fortunate position information and ideas that allow them to also enjoy the hobby. Whether that means that they can go out and buy a Tamiya F14, or whether that means that they can only afford to buy, I don't know, a lesser kit for want of a much better description, then I hope that I can get across the idea that you don't need to be chasing those goals and chasing those aspirations and those dreams, that you can still do what I did as I was growing up and love the sheer thrill of just putting something together and painting the results and looking at it when it's finished. And I find it it's a deeply emotional and personal thing for me, and it always has been. Yep. And I get really kind of upset by the idea that people are sort of saying, well, I can't afford that, I can't keep up, I can't do this, I can't do what you do, I just can't afford it. You don't have to afford that. You can afford this and still enjoy it. Well, and I go back to my point about football and music. Yeah. You can still enjoy that experience. You might not, you might think, oh, I do wish I was watching Marillion or watching Devon Townsend or whatever, because that would be great. But that still has to be part of it. That still has to be, if we can get across the idea that, yeah, you can still get as much pleasure building a £10 Tamiya Hanamag as you can going out and building the brand new, £40 Panzer 4F or Panzer 4G or whatever.
I was just going to say, you look over the last year, how many times has that little Tamiya 35th scale Panzer II cropped up here, there, and everywhere? And number of people who said, "Oh, I've come back from the hobby for a while, and I bought this and I built it, and I had a great time." And you and I were eulogizing that kit at the beginning of 2020 because it's, we still think it's in my opinion, I think it's one of the best tank kits out there. It's not one of the most accurate and it's not one of the most detailed, but I think it's one of the best ones because it's nice, it's cheap, it builds quickly. Yeah, okay. You and I we're pretty much at the same stage at the moment. We're both building the new Tamiya Panzer 4G, 35th scale kit, the best end of about 40 quid, around about that. And I'm into about week 3 now because unlike you, I build very, very slowly. You, on the other hand, you just got, that's it, you sneeze and it's all finished.
I literally did that this time, actually.
There you go. But the thing is, even if I then break down the cost of that kit over 3 weeks, the actual cost per night starts to come down and down and down. And I haven't even got round to to even dealing with the figures at the moment, because 5 figures are easy to eat up the best part of about 2 weeks worth of work just to do that. But the thing is, we go back to this thing about you know, modern day kits, it's a catch-22 thing. You either get people saying, oh, it's a good kit, but it looks like it was designed to a price. I would have rather they'd have spent a bit more money on it to get it right. Then you get people who say it's too expensive.
Yeah.
And again, the point is,
quite often they're the same people.
Well, yeah, it's the same person, exactly.
Literally,
but the thing is,
person.
Literally the same person.
Yeah, but we go back to this. We go back to this thing: is that you can look at the price of a 48 scale Phantom from 1979 and say, why isn't this new Phantom being produced to that equivalent price these days? You're not an exact, not an exact match, but the inflation adjusted price. Why is it not within the same ballpark 40 years later? Again, fine, you can have that, but you can't have that. You can't have that. You can't have that. The cockpit, you've built that Tamiya Phantom, right? Well, you can't have that cockpit. You're just going to have flat panels with decals. You're not going to have. You're not going to have the multi-part ejection seat. You're just going to have 3 pieces. You're not going to have all that surface detail. You're going to have a fraction of that. You're only going to get boxes for the wheel wells. You're not going to get any of the piping or anything. You're not going to get the exhaust. Well, you're going to get the jet pipes, but they're just going to be literally cones, and that's it. There you go.
That sounds like Revell's F4K when that came out.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying is you can't judge the price of things 40 years ago compared to equivalent kits to what they are now, because the amount of detail and the amount of investment and the amount of costs that go into them are astronomical.
Well, it's not just about older kits compared to newer kits. There are plenty of new kits that have come out that have been really good. How much did you enjoy building that Firebee?
Oh, yeah, loved it. Absolutely.
And how much is that thing?
Andy's here. I think I paid about £11 for it.
And comparatively, how much enjoyment did you get out of it compared to much more expensive kits?
It was a 5-day blast.
Yeah,
it was absolutely a 5-day blast. It was a genuine palette cleanser, but it needs to be said as well, being a modern ICM kit, it was absolutely a cutting edge piece of tooling.
Yeah,
it was a cheap model, but it wasn't a cheap kit. It wasn't cheap plastic. It wasn't cheap tooling. It wasn't cheap. The whole kit is a thoroughly cutting edge quality 2021 production. It's like back to where this started is a £21 Mosquito.
Yes.
I'm sorry if you don't think that is value for money. I don't think value for money means what you think it means.
No.
Here we go. It's just right on cue. Thank you, Adam. Adam says Svezda has been good at being reasonably priced, not brand new Tamiya or Edouard, but great at the price you pay. Exactly. Now, I will single out yet again that Svezda Sherman, the new tool Sherman, 25 quid. Brilliant value for money, but it's curbside.
Yeah.
So you're getting a very well detailed external model. What you're not getting is a kit with full interior. So Svezda have been very, very clever in looking at that and thinking, well, we'll just, we'll go with this. People will probably say, if I'd just charged a bit more and put the interior in,
No, if they charge twice as much and put an interior in.
Yeah, it's a 25
That's
quid.
generally what the kits with interiors are. They are twice the price of the basic kit.
Yeah. And Andrew Hills makes the point, yes, indeed, get into railway modelling and then plastic kits will seem really cheap. I can personally attest to that because 2 years ago, when I was coming back on the old steam train from Minehead, and I stopped off at Minehead Station, I thought, oh, copy railway modeler. I haven't read that in years. So it was actually the photograph for a while when you were the editor, actually, Spencer. There was the picture of me sat in a railway carriage reading Railway Modeler. And I can't open it. I thought, oh, this is great. I haven't read Railway Modeler. How much is that? it was an absolute education.
Yeah, it's eye-watering, isn't it?
But the point there is I'm thinking, part of me's thinking, blimey, a GWR brake wagon didn't cost that much when I was a kid. No, but I tell you what, you look at the amount of detail that a GWR brake wagon has packed into it compared to the one that I used to get from the local toy shop back in 1978, worlds apart again. Because again, the market, to some extent, especially the model railway market, redefined itself into, it kind of moved away from being that kind of, that kind of, not say kids hobby, but you know what I mean. It was very much a kind of like a play value thing. It's moved away from that now, and it's very much found its market, which is people who can afford.
Yeah, we come home from a model show now, and if I've spent £150, I'm like, oh my word, that's a lot of money for me to spend at a show. These railway modelers are spending £3,000-4,000-5,000 at a show.
Absolutely true. Yeah,
on 2 or 3, locos and stuff like that. And
10 years ago, I was commissioned to paint an O gauge Class 26 locomotive, which is essentially 48th. It's 43rd, but let's say it's 48th. O gauge locomotive that had been built by somebody else, and it got sent to me, and I painted it. The base price for that locomotive kit, once you factored in the motors that were in it, the base price without anything done to it was £850 before I even touched it. A professional model maker built the model, and he spent 50 hours putting this thing together. Then he sent it through to me, and I spent the equivalent amount of time painting this before it went to the show. That was an £850 kit. Wasn't made up. It wasn't pre-made. It was a resin kit. It was £850 for a model that was about that big. Okay, so you get some idea of how big that is. Okay, similar size to a Tamiya F14. So the idea that a plastic model kit that costs you £20 is expensive is nothing compared to these guys. And then if you imagine putting a rake of trucks behind that, all of which would be another, let's be generous and say each of those rakes of trucks would be £75 each, and you might want another 10 of those. That's another 750 quid before you even begin, plus all the track and all of that kind of thing. But I went to the Worley Model Railway Show, which is a phenomenal event if you ever get a chance to go to it. It's held at the NEC in Birmingham.
It's
Massive
the scale
show.
model world of model railways.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener. And Darren, who I was with at the time, going round the show, he showed me round. I had no idea. I'm not into model railways beyond sort of putting stuff together and painting them. But he took me around the show. And so I was just asking questions. And all. I said, these guys, wandering around. He says, yeah, we call them box pickers, which seemed quite a derogatory term for this. Call them box pickers. He said, and what Drew has just said is absolutely true. He said they will come to this show. They will not blink at spending £5,000 at this event every single year. He said, I know some model railway guys who spend between £750 and £1,000 a month on their hobby. A month. He said they won't even sniff at the idea of spending that amount of money. Up until that point, I don't think I'd spent £1,000 on the hobby in the 10 years that led up to that show. I was so gobsmacked. He said they'll come in here and they'll go up and they'll be picking £200 locomotives off the shelves. He said they'll walk out of here easily with, 5 of those or 10 of those and ancillary stuff. He said I know guys who will spend thousands at this show and they just won't even break sweat. That's the difference between this, and it becomes something that makes you realize that that the hobby that we enjoy in comparison to that, I couldn't run a model railway. There's no way I could afford it.
I can't afford to travel on the real thing. So
who can?
Yeah, I know exactly.
Frankly.
Actually, we're just going to pick up on a couple of comments here because it does feed into what we're talking tonight. Steve Moore says it sounds like comparatively our hobby is relatively cheap. So are we debating a non-issue? Yes, Steve, we are. But this is the problem, you see, because it just keeps coming up.
We're discussing a non-issue that will not go away.
Yeah, and it's to kind of echo what what we've just been talking about, and about cost and everything. It's one of the I've seen this several times. People say kits today shouldn't cost more than, and they suddenly come up with a fixed price, and you kind of go, okay, well, engage in a conversation. Why do you think they shouldn't cost more than this? How many would they have to sell? And how much would they have to trim from the R&D budget to meet that price point? Unfortunately, you never get any feedback because
95% of the time, the actual answer is, why do they think it should be that price? Is because that's the price they're prepared to pay. That's it, and that is the entirety, the beginning, middle, and end of their argument.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 20. I think a kit should be £25. What kit? Well, any kit should never be more than £25. Why? Because I don't want to spend more than £25 on a kit. Not an argument.
No. It is another thing, and it does say, it seems like we're kind of rounding on people about this, but it is a strange road to go down, really, when you're arguing about because what we're talking about with a lot of these things is cost and value, and those two things are entirely different. The cost of something is what it is, but the value of it can depend on entirely on your point of view. You might see something as being, of value despite its cost. Whereas others would go, that's really expensive. I might hunt down a Verlinden Productions plaster building that most people think is junk, but I'll look at it and go, yeah, actually, I think it's worth 50 quid to me, or whatever it costs. But the argument always seems to be very much modeler-centric with us. And obviously, we are only talking about modelers because we're modelers and this is a modeling channel. But if you think about that logically, you'd have to extrapolate that argument out across all commodities. You wouldn't expect BMW to sell a 1 Series car for the same price that Fiat was selling a Fiat 500. Despite the fact that you might want the BMW 1 Series and think, well, it's not much bigger than a Fiat 500. Why is a Fiat 500 12 grand and that 1 Series BMW is 22 grand? Well, that's because BMW want to sell that car for 22 grand and they know that they're going to get 22 grand for it. That's kind of how it works. Why is that Ducati motorcycle £35,000 when I can go out and buy a similar motorcycle that looks the same because it's got 2 wheels, a tank, and a fairing for 8 grand? Yeah, but it's not a Ducati. So when you are talking about the cost of things and the value of things, to me are often the whipping boy for this argument. To me, kits are so expensive. It's outrageous that a 48 scale Tomcat is £100. Yeah, it's a premium product from a premium company. Yeah. It's not a Starfix Spitfire. You're paying for that. I can go out and buy a 5-piece drum kit from Tama and spend 800 quid on it. Equally, I could go out and buy a 5-piece drum workshop kit or a 5-piece Sonor kit from Germany, and it would cost me 3.5 grand. Essentially, they're still the same thing, but two of those things are higher premium than the budget one that I may have purchased.
Yeah. I think part of the problem is also the hobby. Again, I don't want to kind of keep gratuitous plug for my op-ed in the next issue of Model Airplane International, but this is one of the things that I kind of try to explain is that after the hobby kind of you had the oil crisis of the 70s, then you had the worldwide recession of the 70s that went to the 80s, then you had the boom in home entertainment systems, which were things like video games, VCRs, multi-channel television, all that kind of thing. Modeling had to retreat and redefine itself. It had to evolve into a new thing. The perhaps part of the problem is these days is that for some people, they still see it as a hobby that is kind of sold at a price point, I think is the best way of describing it. They can remember an era when they could go into large chain stores and there would be racks and racks of kits that were being sold at a, I don't want to use the term pocket money price, but you know what I mean by that.
Say pocket money price, John, because people still think modelling is a pocket money hobby.
Okay. So pocket money prices, but the simple fact is that the economic model that drove the hobby back then, which was more quantity over quality, because it was all about volume of stuff being sold at particular price points, those days have gone. It's shifted a bit. You still have hundreds of thousands of people who come into this hobby every year, perhaps buy a few kits. Some, it's not for them, they go on to something else. Some, if you pardon the pun, stick with it. And that, to that end of the market is serviced by a huge variety of kits that are, around the £10, £20 mark. You see, that's not an issue. But you also have an economic model now. I know, my model, very good, whereby you are getting these, you're getting your £60 armor kits with full interior. They are being aimed at a specific section of the market now. They are priced that way because they've worked out these are our costs, this is our production run, this is what we need to make a profit and reinvest in the future. So you're talking about completely different things now. Unfortunately, it's very easy to think, 60 quid for an armor kit. I can remember when they were the X-Men mode. Yeah, you can remember them, but they were completely different kits.
I think we're running a risk of being slightly too specific as well in this conversation, because we're talking about kits in essence. I think part of the problem is that some of the commentators that are sort of suggesting that the costs have kind of gone up are returnees to the hobby. There's no two ways about that. Who may well have in the past bought a kit, painted it with a brush, and had a few enamel paints and some glue and all of those kind of, the simplicity of that original approach. Now, if you and all three of us could pick a kit right now and some tools and some paints and a paintbrush or two for less than 30 quid, and we could build a perfectly serviceable model, okay? Not touching any of our other tools, just using some basic tools, scalpel, tweezers, sanding stick, and then perhaps a couple of paintbrushes and a kit and 3 or 4 tins of paint. Okay, we could get all of that stuff for probably less than 25 quid, and we could build a model the way we used to build it. I think the issue that we have these days is in some ways down to social media, in that people that return to the hobby see the best all of the time. You're seeing the high end of the hobby, the models that have been painted with high-end airbrushes, using high-end materials, weathering materials, that whole shooting match, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of, I want my models to look like that. How do I get them to that point? Not sort of missing the point that all of those things have probably been built up over years in terms of materials used and all of that kind of thing. If any one of the three of us had, suddenly gone into stasis in 1980 and had been woken up 6 months ago and just simply wanted to return back to our workbenches, 30 odd years later or whatever, we'd look at the hobby and go, whoa, hold on a minute. All I've got is 10 tins of paint in a little cardboard box on my desk. I've got half a dozen paintbrushes, some Britfix glue. I might have a bottle of liquid poly and some sanding sticks. And I've got, a couple of simple plastic kits. How do I get those results? And that's sort of where we are. It's the curse of of kind of wanting to emulate the curse of seeing.
It's the curse of social media, is that we are so visible. We are so visible, and people at the upper end of the hobby are so visible because they show their stuff off.
Yes.
And people come into the hobby and think they're immediately going to get those results without realizing that we've been doing it for 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit like the old joke about the guy. It's a joke about a guy who says, he goes to an agent and says, I want you to get my client on this prestigious television show. And he says, no problem. How much is it going to cost you? He says, it's going to cost you $10,000. Brilliant. Writes him a check. There you go. And the guy says, right. He picks up a telephone and he says, hi, it's so-and-so here. Got a young lad here. He looks like he's a bit of a talent. Can you get him on the show? Yep, fine. That's it. Brilliant. He says, all sorted. And the manager says, hang about. I just paid $10,000 for you to make a phone call. And he says, no, the phone call cost 25 cents. The rest of it was on the 40 years of experience that got me to the stage where I knew exactly who to ring on the telephone. Yes,
exactly. And so my kind of point is that if you want to build models, if you want to start out and build models, then you don't really need all of the guff that we've got to do that. You don't need all of the guff to do that. We need all of that. I need all of the things that are in my studio because I do this for a living, and my clients expect the best that they can get for the money they're paying for that, however many pennies that might be. But my responsibility for my job is to use that material. I'm a professional. You wouldn't expect to go into a car garage and see, a box of cheap spanners on the workbench and a hammer. You'd expect to go in there and see all of the tools ranged up on the walls. Drew wouldn't expect to go to a machine tool shop and find a cheap knockoff lathe in front of him, and that it hasn't got all of the whistles and bells that he needs. We need all of those kind of things. You don't need those kind of things to build plastic models. All you need is the kit, essentially. The kit, some glue, a few paintbrushes, a few paints, and some rudimentary tools. And I kind of wish that was something that was more front and center for a lot of people. I go back to my drumming analogy from earlier on, which is obviously another passion of mine. But you go back to a drumming analogy. You could become a drummer by having a kick drum, a snare drum, and a hi-hat. Okay, you could buy those three things, and you could have a whale of a time on doing that. You don't need all of the other whistles and bells. You can get that set up.
Much more than that.
Pardon?
Charlie Watts never had much more.
No, exactly.
I was just going to say, Neil Peart started out with what would have been a $50 Canadian drum kit in his bedroom, which consisted of just literally a bass drum, snare, and a hi-hat, and that was it.
That's all you kind of need, and you can kind of play on that, and you can have a great time. So I sort of want to kind of get over that, but I do wonder whether or not there's not a sort of another element to all of this, and that's kind of the need for some simply to propagate this idea just to be antagonistic, So maybe overall, I mean, going back to the idea that this is a non-issue, which all of us agree is a non-issue, is that you've got a sense that that maybe in the grand scheme of things, less people believe this than you would think, and maybe again, social media has given a voice to the antagonist, who just go out there just to sort of fuel the idea.
There's a lot of chaff in there, isn't there?
Yes, and maybe that's kind of it, And
but the thing is, that's not to say that there aren't kits out there that are quite a few notes. Of course there are. Of course there are. Wingnut Wings would not be selling. Sorry, Drew. I'm afraid your audio just cuts out all the time. Wingnut Wings. They weren't going to be putting out what they were putting out for 25 quid. You're looking at some of the 32nd scale kits we're getting now, like the Hong Kong Lancasters and things like that. I mean, they are worlds removed to what. Let's just imagine at the peak of their 30-second scale kits, Revell back in the 70s. Let's imagine they did a 30-second scale Lancaster. It's going to have a fraction of the parts and the detail that Hong Kong kit is going to have. So yes, there are kits out there that I can't justify spending that amount of money on, because me personally, I just think, well, there's plenty of other things that I can build. I think I paid just short of 60 quid for that special hobby Whirlwind, my favorite airplane of all time. At the rate I'm building it, a part a week, that's going to last me, decades. I think a good example. You and I have got the kit, Spence. It's the MPC Eagle Transporter, the great big two-footer. Now, hands up, I spent just shy of 100 quid on that. Do you know what I didn't do? I didn't buy any other kits for months. Literally did not buy any other kits for months. I thought, I want this one. And when I get around to building it, and I will get around to building it one day, I am going to take my time and enjoy it and try to build the most exacting replica that I can, compared to some of the studio scale replicas that you can go out there and buy. That 100 quid is peanuts.
I think you made a really good point up there, almost sort of as an incidental sort of drop in, really, and that's the sheer number of kits that are being released at the moment. And so, whereas back in 1979, at the time of this, you could count the new releases on the fingers of only several hands. Nowadays, there are literally thousands of kits being released across an entire spectrum of cost points, from the very cheap to the very expensive. So, it does seem slightly unbelievable that modelers on any kind of budget, whether it's the smallest budget up to the highest, couldn't find something within there that would interest them, that they could afford. And I think that's the issue. Personally, I've got to the point now where I'm so spoiled with the things that I get to build, sort of mercifully, I guess, that I don't really look at new kits and think, oh, I must have that. They kind of almost go over my head now. I can't remember the last time I looked at something and, oh, that P40, that Great War Hobby thing, which looks absolutely insane. But it's very, very rare, as you guys will know, and you'll attest to this. It's very rare for me to ever look at a kit and go, oh, I've got to have that. But once in a blue moon, something will happen. That Eagle Transport is a good example of that. That Great Wall Hobby P40 is another example. But they are so few and far between. And the reason for that is because there's so much to choose from now. I would just sort of skim through and just go, oh, that's quite interesting. I like the look of that, and that's quite nice. So I sometimes feel that when I read comments, the comments of the type we're discussing this evening, is that I'm looking at that and going, your complaint isn't really about the cost of the kit. Your complaint is that you can't afford it. You want it, but you can't have it. That's the thing. But you could go on and buy something else, that would do that.
By the way, if you do want that kit, if you do want that 40 quid kit, don't buy 8 £5 kits while you're complaining that you can't afford the 40 quid kit.
Or I think it's, as Drew said earlier on, sometimes it's not a case of they can't afford it. It's just they personally do not think it should be sold at that price. That's not the price they're prepared to pay for it. Well, that's a valid point of view, but it's to some respects, you're an individual saying, I think a kit should cost no more than this, and the reality is that the kit will cost that and another 20 quid, then then maybe that kit isn't for you. You see what I mean? Because that's a fixed post that can't be. Yeah, I would like to play football without the offside rule. Well, I'm sorry, you have to play football with the offside rule. perhaps football isn't for you. Perhaps
And let me make something very clear to anybody that's kind of watching this that think in some way I'm denigrating these people.
No, not at all.
I cannot, and I put this out there. I cannot afford. I couldn't afford to buy the kits I build for work. I couldn't justify going out and spending 50 quid on a kit. I certainly couldn't ever justify. We simply don't have the budget for it. I couldn't go out and buy a £100 Tamiya Tomcat. I couldn't do that.
I have not even seen the Tamiya Phantom yet.
Yeah.
I haven't even seen the box of one, because I hope that somebody wants me to build one in due course, but it's not a kit I'll buy and build for myself in the immediate future.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to spend 100 quid on a kit that I'm just going to put on the stash on the off chance I'm going to build it.
No.
Yeah, Spencer makes a good point though. Is that genuinely, I know we can sometimes be a little bit kind of flippant, but genuinely, we're not denigrating anybody for what can sometimes be a genuine feeling about the price of kits. What we're trying to do is actually engage them in conversation to say, okay, that's what okay, that's what you think, that's what you're saying. Come with us and actually have a look at what's out there.
Yeah.
Actually have a look at what what is out there in terms of price, and have a look at why things cost this much and why the market is so different these days. I actually did a in an idle kind of like half an hour the other day. I did a whistle stop tour of about 10 years of a popular model magazine edited by Ray Rimmel in the 1980s and Kelvin Barber, scale models, right? Anyway, I did a rough kind of like thing through of all the kit, what were pretty much got a flavour of what the kit releases were for 10 years worth of the hobby. And then I did kind of like a thing of the number of new kits that have been announced up until August 2021, from January to August 2021. Okay. I stopped at a certain point because we had already exceeded the number of brand new kits that had been released for the entirety of the 1980s by about May this year. Right?
Yeah.
Let's all stop and have a think about that. Between January and May this year, more new kits were announced than the entire 10 years of the 1980s.
And that, in a nutshell, is where the pricing for kits has to play a part.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because there is a pie of modelers who can buy these kits. And that pie is relatively static. But more and more kits are being added to the marketplace, trying to attract the attention of those modelers. Those modelers have only got a finite amount of money that they can spend on kits. So it makes sense for model companies to try and maximize what they can effectively get from modelers to cover the costs of those kits. And I think that needs to be paid. That, in years gone by, there was probably a lot more modelers back then. I mean, there were kids for start off who were all buying kits.
I was making,
and there was thousands, millions of kids in the UK who were buying these kits. The kits were relatively cheap to produce, and so they could be sold relatively cheap because it was that sort of scale factor in being able to sell those products. But these days that scale factor is not there, so they have to try and work out a way of maximizing profit from a smaller group of modelers who are gonna be enticed by, you might have 5 or 6 different kits of the same vehicle. So that sort of needs to be kind of factored into that. But I go back to the point I made earlier about going to watch commentary against QPR this weekend. That's part of the reason why I couldn't justify, spending £100 on a Tamiya Tomcat, because I had to save up to go to an away game. So you're balancing out what you spend your kind of money and your budget on. But sort of irrespective of that, you know, even if I wasn't doing this for a living, I over the years I've sort of got enough kits that would keep me occupied, and you know, buying cheap monogram kits and all of those kind of things. So I hope that I would still be able to indulge my passion, for want of a better description, you know, with the budget that we can have. So certainly, you know, I'm certainly not sort of justifying, you know, and saying, oh, it's great, I can just go out and spend, you know, 500 quid on kits. Don't get me wrong, I cannot do that.
Just to echo what you said, this is literally a quote from my op-ed, and it says the kit market is much different to that of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where there was very much a quantity over quality business model, with manufacturers aiming to hit certain retail price points, and that's because, you know, it was you know, shall we say the ratio of the general market to the enthusiast end, to kind of draw a very you know, very crude kind of comparison, would have been something like about 8-2. You know, it was a huge market that just liked to buy them as, you know, as cheap playthings, and then you had a small section of that market where, you know, kits like, you know, when you look at it, it's kits like Protar, some of those big car kits, some of the, you know, some of the bigger, more expensive things, the Hella, HMS Victory, stuff like that. You know, that was all towards the enthusiast end. It's slightly kind of different these days. Well, it's very different these days. But what you've got now is you still have that casual market that kind of washes in and washes out, but a lot of those high-end releases these days, and which is where the bone of contention comes in, with kits that, shall we say, that are 40 quid plus upwards, those aren't aimed at the casual market really. They are aimed at people who want something specific.
They're not aimed at browsers. They're not aimed at people going to the mall shop and browsing. They're aimed at people who know they want to build that subject.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what I wanted to do is sort of go full circle a little bit. Now, the model that started this discussion off was the Airfix Mosquito. Yes?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer, if you were given that Mosquito in a box and somebody said, build that, how many hours do you think that would take you to build?
Using current techniques, the way I build,
as the way you build, how long do you think? I mean, I don't mean how many weeks. How many hours work do you think you put into doing that model?
Minimum 30.
I would have said if I was doing that, it would have been a maximum of 30.
Yeah, it would, because once I start messing with the finish and all of that sort of stuff, I'd say. But let's say, okay, well, let's use that as
so we're both using a ballpark of 30, aren't we?
30. Let's say 30 hours.
30 hours put into a £22 model. 70p, 75p an hour.
Yeah,
73p an hour.
73p an hour.
There you go.
Right. Okay.
73. So you have got entertainment at 73 pence per hour.
And on Saturday, I'll be at Loftus Road for 90 minutes, and that's costing me 35 quid.
Yeah. And next April, I paid 60 quid for 120 to 150 minutes.
It's a value judgment. And,
it's a value judgment. And if you look at it in those terms, it's an incredible.
Let's go right back to the beginning, an hour and a half ago, before we wrap all this up and everything. Is the hobby too expensive?
No,
absolutely.
The hobby is as expensive as you want to make it.
Yeah,
the hobby is priced for different pockets and expectations.
But it needn't be expensive.
No, it's not expensive.
I don't.
And like Spencer, you know. One of the things, you know, especially here with the Interesting Modeling Co, is one of the things, you know, I'm, as much as we like showing all the new stuff that's coming out, and, you know, et cetera, is I am always conscious of the fact that I am trying to show what can be done with relatively cheap, you know, the cheaper end of things. This is why we were showing what could be done with those Plastic Soldier Company armored cars, what can be done with, you know, what can be done with some of the 72nd scale stuff, like the IBG Cruiser tank, which is currently in the paint shop, and even those Rubicon kits, which I think are astonishingly good value for money. So I think the most expensive model I'm building at the moment is that Tamiya Panzer IV, and like I say, that's because I've been asked to build it. But even then, had I bought that kit, that actual cost is now, in terms of value, the value of that kit is starting to increase because of the amount of time I have spent building it. If I built that over the space of a weekend and had all the figures done and everything, I'd be thinking, well, that wasn't much for 40 quid, was it? It's not.
I'm very much like that with computer games. Drew and I both play computer games, and an average PlayStation game these days is about 50 quid. Between 50 and 60 quid they cost and everything. And as you both know, and as anybody that reads my blogs will know, I'm a massive fan of Assassin's Creed and those kind of role-playing games and everything. Now, I could work my way through one of those games in, do the story, and it would be 20 hours or 25 hours or something like that. But because there's so many side things on them, the game I'm playing at the moment, I'm 100 hours in over 6 months because I just like to take my time with it. It's like everything else. I look at it, I spent 50 quid on the game last year or whatever, and I sort of worm my way through it, and I just sort of play on it for an hour or so in the evening. So the value for money for that, although it seems like it's a lot of money to buy a disc that goes into a machine, once you start factoring in that that it cost me 50 quid and I've played it for the thick end of 100 hours so far, it's not a lot of money, is it?
Even if you bang through the storyline of that game in 20 hours, that's still less than 3 quid an hour.
Yeah,
that's still less than a pint.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah. Oh, I have to say, I quite fancy a pint.
or indeed, the average tank full of petrol.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
So, if you're paying 100 quid for that Phantom and you put 50 hours into it.
Yeah.
2 quid
and
an hour.
And you will put 50 hours.
And you will. 2 quid an hour? Come on.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think I had this argument. I sort of had this debate. I've had this debate many times with people about buying kits and the idea that it's expensive and everything. And I always say the same thing, that model making, plastic modeling, is a 3-stage process. Really, you buy a kit, you put it together and paint it, and you display the results. If you do all 3 of those things, then model making is one of the cheapest hobbies on the planet. There's no 2 ways about it. It doesn't matter whether you've bought a £10 kit or a £200 kit. Factoring that into taking all of those things as part of the equation, buy the kit, put it together, paint it, display the results so that you've got something to look at, an artifact. This hobby is one of the cheapest on the planet. If you buy a £50 plastic kit at a model show, you get it home and you stick it in your stash and leave it in the loft, it's one of the most expensive hobbies that there is, because you've basically just bought insulation for your loft. If you take it at that, because you've essentially bought something, and I'll say this as bluntly as I can, you've essentially bought something that's completely worthless. You buy a plastic model kit and don't build and paint it and display the results, that box of parts is literally worthless. The whole point of it is to put it together, paint it, and display it realistically. And you think about it, if you wanted a model of a car, for sake of arguments, and you wanted a high-end car with the kind of detail that you would get by building a high-end plastic model kit, and you wanted that as a, go out and buy, those racing car models that you get, the F1 models from, can't think what the company's name is now, it'll come back to me, Mini Champs. Mini Champs. Those Mini Champs 43rd scale F1 kit, F1 models are really expensive, okay? But you haven't had the pleasure of putting it together. So all you've done is you bought an artifact. And in itself, that artifact has got value because you can look at it every day. You can display it and you can get the pleasure of looking at it. But you hadn't had everything that leads up to that. So taking it in the round, buy it, build it, display it, this is a very, very cheap occupation, very cheap hobby. But if you buy it and all you do is you just stash it up in the loft, then it starts to be very expensive, and because you haven't got everything else that goes with it. You haven't got the entertainment of it, you haven't got, but then you've got an object to look at, and
And I think there's also, just to kind of finish things off tonight, is we've said this before and we'll say it again, is sometimes you come across a thing about, people, okay, there are genuinely people who cannot afford, a £75 kit, which is fine because, like you, Spencer, I came from a background where, we couldn't afford a 25p Airfix kit. It was so I can genuinely understand if people cannot, and as somebody who is, support the local food bank, there are far more important things out there than plastic toys at the moment.
Yeah, this isn't milk and bread. This is
exactly. And trust me, I have pangs of conscience about, sometimes, that I enjoy a hobby whilst there are people out there can't feed their families. But the thing I would say is, but if people are they don't want to spend 75 quid on one kit, but they're quite happy to spend 25 quid on 3 kits, then it's not a case that you can't afford that kit. It's just personally you're choosing not to invest the money you do have in one single kit. You see, that's a different issue. That's nothing to do with do you have the money? You've got the money. That is a purchasing choice. But the thing we'll come back to again is genuinely, this, we want to have a conversation about this, and we want to genuinely say to people, look, if you think this hobby is unaffordable, you think that that you're being priced out of the hobby, talk to us. We'll find you something that will work for you. It is not. Yeah.
Bryn Robinson has made a comment there. Sometimes you have to buy loft insulation while it's available, I suppose. Yeah, I'm not denigrating the idea of buying kits, and putting them up in the loft. I've got an Eagle transporter that I bought that's up in the loft. I'm not. That's not my point. My point is that if you're making that argument that the hobby is expensive or kits are expensive, but you're buying kits and not building them, then it is expensive. In my opinion, in that sense, it is expensive, and yes, all of us have got lofts full of kits.
I've got a humongous stash these days.
Yeah,
but as far as I'm concerned, it's value for money because it's what I love.
Yeah,
so I'm never looking at that as a dead investment, because the kits are as important to me as the process.
Yes.
Which it isn't to some other people.
And I feel the same way, but neither you nor I are sitting here and saying, actually, everything's way too. That's so. But yeah, we've all got stashes of kits that we're never going to build. It's simple and straightforward as that. But we are, I'm currently doing the loft at the moment and going through everything that's up there, and I'm looking at stuff and thinking, I'm never going to touch this. But there's always that day that I might want to, and that's kind of why I keep hold of them. But I think sometimes we need to see it in the round as to how the value for money that you get from this hobby, because I think it's very easy to run the risk of seeing model kits only as all you're doing is buying raw material. You're buying you're buying an object and an artifact. You're not. You're buying the next 30 hours of entertainment from opening that box. That's what you're purchasing. You're not just purchasing a box of plastic parts with some decals and a set of instructions. You're then buying the journey that kit is going to take you on, and the time that you're going to sit, hopefully enjoying the process of putting it together and painting it. That's what you're buying.
Tim Cavalier makes a point, and he says, is the hobby expensive is different from is the hobby expensive for the beginner to get into, which I think all three of us would say on that. Again, no, it's not. There is going to be a basic investment.
This hobby for 15 quid.
Yeah, there is going to be a basic investment, but no, and in fact, I am on the cusp of actually literally putting my money where my mouth is, and doing another one. I'll have a chat with Brett about it this week. Is doing another one of these kind of budget things where I go out and I go down to Poundland, get a basic toolkit. Okay, it's not a toolkit that I'm going to build a Tamiya Phantom with, but the point is to say, look, you can go out, you can get some wet and dry, you can get some nail files if need be for sanding. You can get a basic knife kit. Probably the most expensive thing is going to be a bottle of plastic glue, which is what liquid cement, which is what you're going to need. And you don't need to buy a cutting mat. You can just get a piece of wood or something, and then we'll go and buy a couple of tins of paint and a model. Say, for example, something like a Zvezda Hurricane, which is about £8. So, no, I don't think it is. If what people are saying is the hobby is expensive for people who are coming back and they want to immediately jump in and build a mini art tank with a full interior, that kit isn't for them at the moment. That's a good point.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
The next topic. Is the hobby dying? Is the hobby dying? No.
No. Guys, I am going to have to...
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. We're all quitting now. We've had enough.
Yeah, that's it. We all agree the hobby isn't dying, but genuinely...
We're supposed to be covering 2 subjects tonight. We got carried away with one, but that's fine.
No. Genuinely, there is nothing more to say about second one there.
No, that's the answer. No.
That's the answer. Like I say, we want to have a conversation about this. If you think the hobby is too expensive, talk to us. We will show you that it's not. It genuinely isn't. It's a hobby for everybody of all pockets. So
quite right.
On that note, I need to go and have some food. Drew needs to go and sort his audio. Spencer needs to go and have a beer.
I need to go and have some food. We've got stuff to do. So, yes.
Yeah. So on that note, thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight for our over 90-minute with extra time special. We really do appreciate it. I hope you got something out of this. And I hope if you come across the same kind of the same thing we come across is try and kind of engage people in conversation and say it really isn't. Discuss it. Discussion is the best thing. On that note, I'd like to say thank you to Drew, thank you to Spencer, thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Congratulate yourselves. We'll be back on Sunday with the new show. So from myself and these two, good night.
See you later.
Stay out of trouble.
Cheers. Bye.